Hi 8th graders, today I'll be teaching you about introduction paragraphs. Introduction paragraphs follow what we call the funnel structure. They start with really broad ideas of what you'll be talking about, and then each sentence throughout the introduction gets more and more specific until you finish with your very specific thesis at the end of the funnel. So you'll start broad and you'll end specific. There are 4 sections to an introduction paragraph as you move from the very broad hook to the very specific thesis at the end. The first part of the introduction is the hook. It is grabbing your reader's attention with an interesting, broad idea that relates in some way to the topic that you'll be discussing. Next, you have the bridge. The bridge is 1 to 2, maybe 3 brief sentences that connect the hook to the story that you'll be talking about. This is also where you'll introduce the story's title and author. Then you'll give a short summary, maybe 2 to 3 sentences of what your story is about, and only the elements that are really important for your readers to know to be able to understand your thesis. Notice that you don't need to go more than about 3, maybe 4 sentences for this summary. And finally, you'll finish with your thesis. Your thesis has 2 important parts. It needs to make a claim, and it has to state your reasons for that claim. Remember that your claims need to be arguable, debatable. They're not statements of fact. In fact, in this case, your claim of your thesis is going to answer the question that's in your prompt. Then your reasons are brief but specific references to the examples that you'll use to prove your claim. Let's look at this example introduction paragraph together. Pause the video so that you can read through the paragraph before we start labeling the hook, the bridge, the summary, and the thesis. Next, we'll label the sections of this paragraph. We begin with the hook, and remember the hook has to be the broad idea that connects to the topic of your writing. The smallest actions often create the greatest changes. It has nothing to do with the story yet. It's just a broad introduction to the specific details that will be important to know in the story later on. Next, we need to find the bridge. Remember that the bridge has to connect the hook to the specific details of the story. So when I say this contradiction, that's referring to the contradiction that exists in the hook, that small actions create great change. It also, by the end of this sentence, connects to the author and the title of the story that I'll be talking about. That means this second sentence is my bridge. Next, I'm looking for the brief summary, just a couple sentences about what the story is about. So it looks to me like this one introduces characters. This one tells me what happens briefly at the beginning of the story. And then this sentence tells me a little bit more about what's happening after, or what's happening towards the end of the story. Finally, I need to label the thesis. Looks to me like this last sentence is the thesis, and that makes sense for the funnel structure. I started broad, and then I got more and more specific until finally I have the most specific sentence about my thesis for this particular story. Then the question in my prompt was, what was the theme of this story called Thank You, Ma'am? Well, I start with a claim. I have Hughes demonstrates how small acts of kindness can produce positive change. That answers the question, and it's something that's arguable. Then I have to make sure to identify the 2 reasons that exist in this thesis. Let's see, when Mrs. Jones welcomes Roger into her home, and when Roger thanks Mrs. Jones. So both of those things support this claim that's in my thesis. So here's your classwork that's due on Tuesday, September 25th. You're going to choose to think about either The Most Dangerous Game or Checkouts, one of our short stories. Then you're going to write an introduction paragraph that introduces the story and states the theme in the thesis. Be sure that your introduction paragraph includes each of the 4 elements. It has to have a hook, a bridge, a summary, and a thesis. Don't worry, you're not going to write the whole essay. You're just going to write the introductory paragraph. all the materials that you need for the rest of today and maybe for your homework that's due on Tuesday is on Google Classroom in the first quarter topic.